Are you troubled by strange noises in the middle of the night? If the answer is yes, then don't wait another minute. Pick up your phone and call the professionals.
Who you gonna call?
Go Ghostbusters!
It's hard to believe now, but one of the first audiences to watch the original 1984 Ghostbusters movie thought it was terrible. One important studio executive said, "Don't worry, we all make mistakes." And the chairman of the Coca-Cola company said, "Gee, we're gonna lose our shirts." Of course, they were all wrong. Ghostbusters, which would basically invent the genre of special effects-driven comedy, would go on to be the second biggest movie of 1984, becoming the foundation of a future Ghostbusting empire. Now, with 3 sequels, 2 animated series, and a reboot, Peter Venkman, Ray Stantz, Egon Spengler, and Winston Zeddemore have been a mainstay in pop culture for more than 40 years. And after 4 decades, including a passing of the baton between the old generation of Ghostbusters to the new, including director Ivan Reitman passing it to his son Jason, the Ghostbusting business is stronger than ever.
Can I tell you something else?
What?
Buster makes me feel good. Makes me feel good.
And while we don't think the most recent movie is the end of the Ghostbusters story, we do have questions.
Overruled.
Sustained.
Where did the idea for this comedy, action, horror juggernaut of a movie come from? How did the cartoon impact the movies? Why did it take so long to make Ghostbusters 3? What really happened when the world went crazy over the making of the Girl Ghostbusters reboot? And where will the franchise go from here? All these questions and more are about to be answered. This is the definitive history of the Ghostbusters franchise, and you've never heard it told like this before.
Switch me on.
And if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please do so now, and give us a thumbs up if you want more videos like this. And make sure you stay tuned to the end to see how to get this awesome, one-of-a-kind, limited edition, Ghostbusters-inspired graphic design only at mixtees.com.
Raise a call.
Dan Aykroyd began writing Ghostbusters in late 1981 after reading an article about quantum physics and parapsychology.
Using the real work of the Maimonides Dream Lab and Duke University's parapsychological department,
He started thinking about classic ghost comedy movies. Ghosts had always been a fascination for Aykroyd. He was a 4th-generation believer in spirits and mediums, and his father even wrote a book called History of Ghosts. Ghostbusters was a natural extension of his beliefs in family history. Ghostbusters was also a vehicle for John Belushi and Aykroyd's next movie. After doing 4 films together, including the Blues Brothers, they were becoming a power duo.
Got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes, it's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses.
And Dan wanted to continue the magic. But when Belushi died on March 5, 1982, ironically while Dan was writing one of John's lines for Ghostbusters, the run would be over and Aykroyd would lose one of his best friends. After Belushi's death, Aykroyd started thinking about other people he'd worked with on Saturday Night Live that could take his friend's place. So Aykroyd sent a half-completed script to Bill Murray and asked him if he wanted to be in the movie. According to Aykroyd, Murray responded favorably to the script, which led him to assume Bill had agreed to be in the movie. As we'll find out, that wasn't quite the case. But let's get back to that in a moment. Aykroyd then took his script to his agent and explained what he wanted to do. His agent suggested one of his other clients, a Canadian director named Ivan Reitman. Aykroyd had known Reitman in the 1970s from Toronto's comedy scene and was more than happy to have him direct. Reitman was coming off 2 popular movies with Meatballs in 1979 and Stripes in 1981, both movies that just happened to also star Bill Murray.
So this year, each camper will stalk and kill his own bear in our private wildlife preserve.
you sure the children can hack that?
We'll see.
So Aykroyd sent Ivan the script in mid-1982, hoping he would agree to direct the film. Reitman took one look at the script, and it was love at first sight. Well, no it wasn't. He thought the story was way too outlandish. Aykroyd's first Ghost Smasher script was set in the future, taking place on a number of different dimensional planes. It was an action film with monsters floating around in spaceships, and Ghost Smashers were a dime a dozen. Think of them as future ectoplasma plumbers. The three ghost plumbers would hop from dimension to dimension, cleaning up ghosts and fighting other nefarious ghost smasher teams. By the 10th page, Reitman was exhausted. By the 50th page, he was counting the budget in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
But we are having a special this week on proton charging and storage of the beast.
For comparison, Star Wars Return of the Jedi cost just over $32 million to make in 1983. Reitman had no idea how he was going to make the futuristic, interdimensional ghost-smashing movie that Aykroyd had written, so he set the script aside.
It should be in a real city on Earth, i.e. New York.
The third original Ghostbuster in Aykroyd's script wasn't Harold Ramis. It was actually another SNL co-star, Eddie Murphy. So while working with Murphy on Trading Places in late 1982, Aykroyd told him about the script he was writing with him in mind and offered him a role. Murphy declined as he was already committed to making Beverly Hills Cop, which ironically would eventually end up replacing Ghostbusters at the box office as the top movie of 1984, but more on that in a bit. Once Aykroyd finished a second draft of the script in January 1983 and was turned down by Murphy, Dan submitted his fully completed 180-page script to Reitman in April. Aykroyd really wanted to sell his vision. He asked for the help of an artist friend who created concept art while Dan videotaped himself wearing the Ghostbusters uniform and gear, which he had made from styrofoam and old radio parts. Aykroyd would stop at nothing to get Reitman on his team. The good news for Aykroyd was that Reitman had been thinking about his Ghost Smashers movie. Ivan had an idea about combining comedy with larger-than-life science fiction if told in a natural and realistic way. Reitman met Aykroyd at Arts Delicatessen in Los Angeles to give him the bad news. He couldn't do the movie the way Dan wrote it, but he told him he saw the movie as a going-into-business story. You have three smart guys, and they get into trouble just at the same time these ghosts start appearing in New York. They trap them and become famous. Aykroyd agreed with the director, and Reitman wanted to include Harold Ramis in the rewrite. Ramis agreed to not only help write it, but he also wanted to be in the movie. Aykroyd was ecstatic. He had his three Ghost Smashers. Reitman officially agreed to direct the film in May 1983. They had Aykroyd, Ramis, and Murray for comedic gold. But there was only one small problem. Everyone thought Bill Murray was in the movie, except for Bill.
We never talk anymore.
Once he agreed to do it, Reitman went to Columbia Pictures for financing and pitched the movie to its CEO, Frank Price. They had just collaborated on Stripes with Murray and Ramis starring, and it had made the studio more than $70 million. When Reitman asked to make a $25 million comedy with Bill Murray, Price thought it was as close to a sure thing not to lose money as he could get. There was one catch though. The movie had to be released by June 8, 1984. In less than 13 months. And they didn't even have a script. Price wanted the movie to lead off next year's summer blockbuster season. So Ramis, Reitman, and their families shacked up with Aykroyd at his place on Martha's Vineyard for a month. While the families hung out during the day, the three hunkered down in Aykroyd's office and banged out a half-baked script in about 2 weeks. Half-baked because, according to Ramis's daughter, the three writers were stoned a lot of the time. Perhaps that's why Reitman would later say the first draft had a lot of leaps of logic they had to work around. But regardless of everything else in the script, the one thing they knew they wanted to do was have an audience experience the journey from skepticism to belief. And with that, Ghostbusters was born. And nearly everything in Aykroyd's original script was gone, except the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
Well, there's something you don't see every day.
They may have cut most of Aykroyd's original over-the-top script, but they still needed a lot of special effects. In order to pull off realistic ghosts and effects, they were going to need the best in the business, ILM, or Industrial Light and Magic. It was the special effects company created to make Star Wars, and was responsible for pretty much any heavy special effects movie being made in Hollywood. But there was only one problem. They weren't available. George Lucas was producing Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and since he owned ILM, they were busy making his movie. But Richard Edlund, who had won 2 Academy Awards at ILM, wasn't happy with the company going corporate and was considering going out on his own. Reitman saw an opportunity to get his movie made and went back to Price at Columbia and asked if they would work a deal with MGM and give $5 million so Edlund could start up his own special effects house. MGM was making 2010 The Year We Make Contact, and they also needed an effects studio. Price said yes, and Boss Films was born, which cherry-picked some of the best talent from ILM. But now that it was created, Boss Studios would only have 10 months to create and shoot effects that had never been done before. They had a huge task in front of them. Aykroyd and Ramis were locked in, and Dan had been insisting Murray would do the movie, but no one had heard from the actor. Reitman was well aware of how difficult Bill was to pin down. You just never know when or if he's going to show up. He didn't say yes to being in Meatballs until the day before shooting, which was terrifying for Reitman. So on Stripes, Ivan agreed to co-star Harold Ramis at Murray's request because he knew that would put more pressure on Bill to commit faster to the movie. Aykroyd, who thought he had Murray nailed down for Ghostbusters, ended up having to do something similar. It's not that Murray didn't want to do Ghostbusters, he just had something else he wanted to do more. The movie was called The Razor's Edge, a small-budget dramatic role for the comedian. The 1944 novel was about a World War I veteran on a quest for meaning and enlightenment. Murray co-wrote the script wanting to stretch himself creatively. The problem was, no one would finance the film. Dan Aykroyd pulled Reitman's Stripes trick and used something Bill wanted to get him to commit to Ghostbusters. He suggested Bill use Ghostbusters as a negotiation piece to push Columbia Pictures to make The Razor's Edge. Because Price didn't think he'd lose money on The Razor's Edge, he agreed to Murray's demands. The only problem was that Ghostbusters was on a deadline, and Murray refused to film that until after he'd filmed his movie abroad. Ghostbusters' principal photography would begin in October, and Murray needed 5 months to do The Razor's Edge. It was going to be tight. Reitman and Aykroyd already had their dream team, but it didn't mean the studio wasn't going to shop the market a bit. Other actors who were considered for the main 3 Ghostbusters included Michael Keaton, Chevy Chase, Tom Hanks, Robin Williams, Steve Guttenberg, Richard Pryor, Christopher Walken, John Lithgow, Christopher Lloyd, and Jeff Goldblum. According to Ramis, the 4th inexperienced Ghostbuster, Winston Zeddemore, was brought in to represent the audience and to provide a reaction to the ridiculousness that was happening all around them.
Full trance mediums, the Loch Ness Monster, and the theory of Atlantis.
If there's a steady paycheck in it, I'll believe anything you say.
They also wanted the 4th Ghostbuster to be African American because they felt it was socially responsible to make the team more diverse. Ernie Hudson auditioned 5 times for the role. Reitman tells the story that Ernie was traveling 12 floors with him in an elevator, and he told him there's nothing for him in the movie. He didn't think he was right for the part. He had been in another movie Reitman had seen where he was bald and didn't have the attitude he was looking for. But eventually Ivan broke down and fell in love with Hudson's sweetness, casting him in the role. In the original draft of the script, the Zeddemore character had all of the amazing lines, and the role Hudson thought he was playing was much larger than what he ended up doing on screen. He thought the role would be a career changer and even accepted a much lower pay rate than he wanted to because he believed in the part. But once they realized they couldn't give all the best lines to the 4th guy, they moved them over to Murray and had Zeddemore come in on page 68 instead of page 28. Hudson had been frustrated at first. The role was reduced, and when he went down on the first day to shoot, the PAs wouldn't let him on the set because they didn't know he was in the movie. But after Ramis took him under his wing, things went more smoothly. Most fans never realized Winston Zeddemore was a prior Air Force demolitions expert, which heavily qualified him for the job of Ghostbuster. Other actors also considered for Winston were Gregory Hines from History of the World Part 1 and Reginald VelJohnson, who ended up playing a small part in Ghostbusters as a jail guard. For the part of gatekeeper Dana Barrett, Sigourney Weaver seemed perfect for the role.
Are you the Keymaster?
Not that I know of.
But there was resistance to casting her because she had been a serious actress in both Alien and The Year of Living Dangerously. But once she got down on all fours and started howling like a dog during her audition, Reitman found his Dana. He also told her she could get off the floor because the terror dog would be done with special effects. Weaver was the one who came up with the idea to possess her, which Reitman loved because it gave the character personal stakes in the events that were unfolding.
There is no Dana, only soul.
Weaver changed Dana's occupation from model to musician to give her some depth. Years later, the production team would give Sigourney a lot of credit for bringing out the best in all the other actors, especially Murray. Other actresses who auditioned for the role included Daryl Hannah, Denise Crosby, Julia Roberts, and Kelly LeBrock. It's impossible now to imagine anyone but Rick Moranis playing Keymaster Louis Tully.
Does anybody want to play Parcheesi?
Okay, who brought the dog?
But he wasn't the first choice for the role. Reitman originally wanted John Candy for the part. The SCTV veteran had already done The Blues Brothers with Aykroyd and Stripes with Reitman, Ramis, and Murray, so it felt right to have him in Ghostbusters as well. The only problem was John wanted to play the role with a German accent and surrounded by multiple German shepherds. Reitman explained there were already enough dogs in the film, but Candy wouldn't relent. Aykroyd would later say he was agented out of the part, as his agent just wanted too much money for the role. But as it were, Moranis and Reitman had known each other from Toronto, so Ivan called him up and asked him to take a look at the part. Rick called him back and said, "Thank Candy for me. This is the greatest thing I've ever read." Fans would agree that Moranis significantly helped make Ghostbusters the success it would become. And as much as we love John in so many roles, us Ghostbuster fans say thank you.
Many Shubs and Zools knew what it was to be roasted in the depths of the slaughter that day, I can tell you.
Sandra Bernhard could have been the Ghostbusters secretary, Janine Melnitz, but she passed and the role went to Annie Potts.
Thank you. We got one!
When Potts arrived for her first day of filming, she was rushed into the scene they were shooting. She was in such a hurry, she borrowed the glasses from the set dresser, which Janine would end up wearing for the rest of the film. They explored her character's relationship with Egon, and while you can see it budding a little in the film, ultimately Ramis didn't think it was right for his character to explore that. Potts credits her Brazilian nanny for helping her come up with Janine's look.
Quit better jobs than this. Ghostbusters, what do you want?
And you can't have an 80s movie without a pain-in-the-butt, uppity semi-villain that no one likes.
I'm Walter Peck. I represent the Environmental Protection Agency, the 3rd District.
Great. How's it going down there?
For the part of Walter Dickless Peck, William Atherton got the role while he was performing on Broadway. The nickname was ad-libbed by Murray, and it stuck in the film. Unfortunately, it would follow Atherton in real life. One day, while he was walking down 7th Avenue in New York City, a school bus crowded with children started shouting, "Hey Dickless!" at the top of their lungs. If you wondered how big Ghostbusters was in 1984, it was kids screaming from school buses big. Atherton would go on to solidify his pompous villain role in other movies like Real Genius, Die Hard, and Biodome.
Well, you could believe, Mr. Pecker. My name is Peck.
Pee Wee Herman himself, Paul Rubens, was originally slated to play the Sumerian god Gozer the Gozerian. But when he passed on the role, it was given to Yugoslavian actress Slavica Hovan, and the character was changed to have an androgynous Grace Jones or David Bowie appearance. But because of Jovan's strong Slavic accent, the voice was actually done by Patty Edwards, who went uncredited in the movie.
Are you a god, then?
When filming began in New York on October 28, 1983, things didn't start out smoothly. Bill Murray was 5 days late, refusing to leave France until he'd seen a rough cut of The Razor's Edge. He was picked up at the airport and rushed to the set to get in his outfit. Reitman wasn't even sure if Murray had read the script yet, but at least he was there. And seeing Murray, Aykroyd, and Ramis in their Ghostbusters uniform, Ivan felt the movie was going to be great. But even though the rocky start was out of the way, Reitman had another problem on his hands. Someone else owned the rights to the name Ghostbusters. An animation company called Filmation, who was behind the He-Man cartoons as well as Star Trek the Animated Series, had a show called Ghostbusters back in 1975. Columbia had been negotiating with them for the title, but Filmation wanted more money than Columbia was willing to pay. The studio was so worried they wouldn't be able to get the name, they made Reitman and his team film scenes multiple times with different titles for the film. Ghostbusters, Ghost Breakers, Ghost Stoppers, and Ghost Blasters were all used in multiple scenes just in case.
Ghostbusters! Ghostbusters! Ghost Stoppers! Ghost Blasters!
Blasters?
Blasters.
Who are you gonna call? Yeah, none of those other names sound right. And the name changes were becoming a huge hassle during production. From having to replace signage to doing multiple takes inserting various names, it was getting ridiculous. So while a crowd of 400 extras was chanting Ghostbusters over and over again, a producer jumped on a nearby payphone and called Columbia, held the phone up so they could hear the chanting.
Well, listen to this!
From that moment forward, the production only used Ghostbusters while filming. Columbia head Frank Price, who had greenlit the movie, called their parent company Coca-Cola and asked for the money to get the name deal done. When they said no, Price quit. He was tired of being questioned as the head of the studio. So he took the job as head of Universal Pictures, who just so happened to own the name Ghostbusters. And wouldn't you know it, Price, now in charge of a totally different studio, was able to make the deal so Reitman could name his movie Ghostbusters. How about that for serendipitous?
We're the best, we're the beautiful, we're the only Ghostbusters.
Steve Johnson had spent months designing the iconic green ghost that everybody is familiar with, called Onion Head. Oh, although you know him better as Slimer. Onion Head was his first name before it was aptly changed to better represent his attack on humans. He created 12 versions of Slimer before his team finally agreed on one. Then, the night before all the executives were coming to approve his design, he got a note that said, "Make the ghost look like John Belushi." Ramis and Aykroyd thought this would be a great way to pay an homage to their friend in the movie.
It's right here, Ray. It's looking at me.
He's an ugly little spud, isn't he?
I think he can hear you, Ray.
Slimer would be a slobby, obnoxious ghost, just like Belushi's Animal House character Bluto. Johnson couldn't believe they were asking him to change the ghost after months of work the night before it was going to be approved. So he ended up not changing the ghost at all, and just told him it was Belushi. And everyone said, yes, it looks exactly like him. Disaster averted. Shooting took place for 6 weeks in New York, finishing just before Christmas. They then headed back to Los Angeles to complete the film. Because of the extremely short production schedule, Reitman edited at the same time they were shooting. When principal photography wrapped in February, the special effects team had less than 4 months to complete between 200 and 260 optical effects. Thanks to Ghostbusters, when other studios saw what the production team did in such a short period of time, they started cutting 6 months off of post-production on their movies as well. What they didn't know is the special effects team worked 7 days a week and sometimes 20 hours a day to complete that movie in time. The iconic Stay Puft Marshmallow Man had made Reitman nervous from the beginning. He was worried about how believable it would look on film. As it turns out, he didn't have much to worry about.
We've been going about this all wrong. This Mr. Stay Puft is okay. He's a sailor. He's in New York. We get this guy laid, we won't have any trouble.
The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man suits were expensive at $20,000 each. 3 were made, and all were destroyed during filming, much to the delight of people watching in the theater. The Ecto-1 we see at the firehouse prior to its transformation as the Ghostbuster Mobile is a 1959 Cadillac Miller Meteor Sentinel limo-style on-loader combination car ambulance conversion. Try saying that twice. There were 2 Miller Meteors used in Ghostbusters. The first black and gray one we see was a rental, and only used for a scene in New York and another one in Los Angeles. The transformed iconic Ghostbuster Mobile we see throughout the movie was a Cadillac Miller Meteor Futura and was purchased in West Hollywood. According to the Volo Museum, only 25 of the Futuras were ever produced, and 2 of them became Ectomobiles. And that iconic blaring siren sound you hear in the movie? Not an actual siren. Sound designer Richard Beggs created the sound from a leopard snarl that was reversed and played backwards with the speed change. One of the other iconic sounds from the movie, apart from the siren, is the Ghostbusters theme song written and performed by Ray Parker Jr.
If it's something strange in your neighborhood, who you gonna call?
But he wasn't the first or even the second choice to do the song. He was actually a last-ditch effort. Columbia originally reached out to Lindsey Buckingham of Fleetwood Mac fame, who had written the popular Holiday Road song for 1983's National Lampoon's Vacation movie, but he passed on it, not wanting to become a soundtrack artist. Huey Lewis from Huey Lewis and the News was also asked to write a song for the movie, but he declined, although that wouldn't be the end of his connection to this movie. But more on that in just a moment. Dozens of other submissions came in, but none of them were right for the film. That's when Gary Lamel at Columbia Pictures suggested Ray Parker Jr., who he knew through making records with Barry White. Parker met with Reitman, and the director gave him the bad news. He only had a few days to get the song done. Armed with film footage that included temporary background music and a requirement that the word Ghostbusters be in the song, Parker got to work. But no matter how many different ways he tried to sing it, the lyric Ghostbusters just didn't sound right. Then he remembered the scene in the movie with the Ghostbusters commercial, and it reminded him of a plumbing or exterminator service. And that's when the light bulb went off in his head. Who you gonna call? Inspired by the temporary background music he found on the film footage that Reitman had given him, Parker Jr. quickly created a tune, wrote the lyrics, and got it on tape for Reitman. Ivan loved it. Moviegoers would love it too. During the summer of 1984, you couldn't turn the dial more than 2 stations without hearing Parker Jr. belting out that upbeat ghost-busting anthem. The song debuted a week after the movie's release at number 68 on the Billboard Hot 100 and would peak at number 1 on August 11, staying there for 3 weeks. Nearly everyone on the planet loved the song. That is, except for one person. Remember earlier when we said Huey Lewis wasn't done with Ghostbusters? Yes, well, apparently the temporary background music that was on the film footage Reitman gave Parker Jr. was the Huey Lewis and the News song, I Want a New Drug. And if you listen to both songs, it's very obvious that Ray's melody was heavily borrowed from Huey's song. A 1985 case settled out of court would make things right. Ray Parker's huge hit song would have a lasting effect on Huey Lewis, who made sure he didn't turn down his next movie theme song invitation when Back to the Future gave him a call. Regardless of the court drama, the Ghostbusters theme song success should be fully credited to Ray Parker Jr. The song added to the movie so much, it's estimated to have added $20 million to the film's box office gross all by itself. The Ghostbusters music video directed by Reitman was number 1 on MTV and featured Parker Jr., the Ghostbusters themselves, as well as numerous celebrities who didn't appear in the film, including Chevy Chase, John Candy, George Wendt, Al Franken, and Danny DeVito, among others. Ghostbusters premiered on June 12, 1984, opening opposite another classic, Gremlins, who would finish 3rd domestically and 4th at the worldwide box office that year. How did Ghostbusters do? At $220 million, Ghostbusters would end up being the 6th highest domestic grossing film at that time, behind E.T., Star Wars, Jaws, Return of the Jedi, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. In fact, Ghostbusters was a sleeper hit. The big projected movie of that year was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which would end up finishing a distant second at US theaters. Ghostbusters would remain number 1 at the box office for 7 consecutive weeks until Prince's Purple Rain on July 27th. But 2 weeks later, Ghostbusters would once again take the top spot. Beverly Hills Cop, with the international fame of comedian Eddie Murphy, who passed on Ghostbusters, would end up edging out the scary comedy worldwide by a little over $5 million.
I have the money and I do want to do business, but with you, I ain't doing nothing in front of this dude because this dude is a cop.
It would take another 4 years for Ghostbusters to be beat at the box office when Who Framed Roger Rabbit did it in 1988. With a movie this epic, there would certainly be a sequel, right? Ghostbusters had been a crowning achievement for Columbia in 1984. It was its first blockbuster movie under owner Coca-Cola, but the beverage giant knew a whole lot about fizzy drinks and nothing about making movies. In fact, they didn't want to do Ghostbusters in the first place, and Frank Price, who was responsible for their first blockbuster, left his job because of Coca-Cola. Coke replaced Price with Guy McElwain, Steven Spielberg's first agent. He was an internal hire within Columbia. He would be responsible for the only other movie to break $100 million with Karate Kid 2. But it was the movie Ishtar that got him fired, as it was considered the biggest box office flop of the decade.
Call it luck, call it karma. I believe that everything happens for a reason.
It was around this time, in 1985, that backroom discussions about a Ghostbusters sequel started to happen. But according to Reitman, at that time, the main actors had no interest in making a sequel. Besides, they were busy. Reitman was directing Legal Eagles, Aykroyd was making Spies Like Us, Ramis was directing Club Paradise, and Murray was, well, Murray left acting.
Don't stare at me, you got the bug eyes.
He had described Ghostbusters' success as a phenomenon that would forever be his biggest accomplishment, and felt radioactive after the failure of his personal project, The Razor's Edge. He had walked away from making movies and wouldn't return for 4 years until Scrooged. In the meantime, Coca-Cola, continuing to prove they didn't know anything about the movie business, approved the hiring of British producer David Putnam in 1986. Responsible for such movies as Chariots of Fire and The Killing Fields, Putnam had the credentials, but he'd never ran a studio. Coca-Cola, who had been trying to run the studio like its beverage business, was vocally unhappy with the studio's inability to maintain their bottom line, which put pressure on not losing money. In that case, Putnam would be the right guy for the job. He was a vocal opponent for overpaying for movies and actors. He wanted to sweep into Hollywood and change the game, choosing instead to hire foreign directors and opt for smaller budgets. Putnam thought the idea of paying a director $3 million for a movie was ridiculous, when he could pay a better director $100,000. As honorable of an idea as that may have been, Hollywood wasn't about to give up its payday. And Coca-Cola had failed to realize way back when Frank Price was in charge that making successful movies wasn't about a formula. It was about building relationships and understanding how to balance what's popular with being artistic. This is also something Putnam didn't understand, because he was very vocal that he was not a fan of sequels and big-budget movies, and that included Ghostbusters 2. Despite Putnam being averse to the big blockbuster sequel, according to Reitman, executives above Putnam at Columbia's New York branch were attempting to work around him. It didn't help that Putnam found himself in fights with high-profile actors of the day like Warren Beatty, Jack Nicholson, and Bill Cosby over pay. But when he started criticizing Bill Murray for making a lot of money and not giving back to the art community, he was messing with a Columbia golden goose.
Generally, you don't see that kind of behavior.
Early rumors indicated Putnam had actually been considering greenlighting Ghostbusters 2 without the original cast simply because he hated Murray.
Hello, I'm Peter.
Putnam had publicly criticized Murray as well as his talent agent Michael Ovitz, who was also the agent for Reitman, Ramis, and Aykroyd. Putnam would end up submitting his resignation in September, although many believed it wasn't his choice. Dawn Steele was hired by Columbia to replace Putnam and became the first female studio head. Her first order? Get Ghostbusters 2 into production. Aykroyd and Ramis had been working on the script for Ghostbusters 2 since early 1986. Aykroyd described his first draft of the movie as too inaccessible. He wanted to avoid New York and film overseas. The first draft followed Dana Barrett, Sigourney's character, who was kidnapped and taken to Scotland. There, she discovers an underground fairy ring, a naturally occurring ring of mushrooms, sometimes linked in folklore to fairies or witches. The Ghostbusters would have to travel through an underground pneumatic tube over 2,000 miles long that would have taken 3 days of travel. But the idea seemed really far out, and in the end, they would choose to stay in New York for a familiar setting, but would adjust the story to allow them to explore underground. Hence, the River of Slime. Ramis and Aykroyd partnered once again to write the script, and they decided that the 5 years passage of time between movies should be reflected in the film. Ramis suggested the story focus on a baby because he had previously developed a horror story about a possessed infant with adult abilities. This led to the creation of Oscar, who initially was going to be the child of Dana and Peter Venkman, who would have maintained their relationship since Ghostbusters. Murray didn't like the idea, feeling it would create an imbalance in the film, placing too much of the emphasis on his and Dana's relationship with the child, rather than the Ghostbusters doing what they do. So instead, they chose to have Peter and Dana's relationship fail, so she could marry, have a child, and be divorced before Ghostbusters 2. Ramis wanted to make sure the Ghostbusters didn't remain heroes after their victory in the last film, and was looking for a more original approach for the sequel. Sequels were just starting to earn their reputation as money grabs in the 1980s, and since this was Reitman's first sequel, he was worried about being able to surprise the audience without relying on too many elaborate effects. But there was a bigger problem facing the adult-oriented Ghostbusters creative team behind the original blockbuster, and that problem was a cartoon. Columbia wasn't about to let the popularity of the first Ghostbusters movie go to waste, and when you can't quickly make a sequel, well, you make a cartoon. So in the fall of 1986, who were kids gonna call on Saturday mornings? The Real Ghostbusters! The word real had to be added when Filmation, who had fought the name rights for the first movie, also fought the cartoon. The Real Ghostbusters continues the adventures of Peter, Egon, Ray, Winston, Janine, and yes, their mascot ghost Slimer. Slimer had become so popular that a year before Ghostbusters 2 came out, the cartoon was renamed Slimer and the Real Ghostbusters. So not only would Ramis and Aykroyd need to find a way to capture that adult-oriented original Ghostbusters movie, but Columbia had given them marching orders to make sure they balanced that with the needs of the popular children's cartoon audience. This is why Slimer was brought back for Ghostbusters 2, and why sexual situations like Aykroyd's ghost dream and adult-oriented jokes are almost non-existent. This was a tough task for the guys who essentially only made adult-oriented movies.
I'm trying to concentrate on the road.
After a little more than a year working on the script, the studio was ready to move forward with Ghostbusters 2. The only problem is, it hadn't checked in with its director. In April 1987, Columbia announced Ghostbusters 2 would go into production that November. Reitman hadn't been informed and hadn't even reviewed the unfinished script yet. Despite all the trouble with Putnam, the main obstacle to getting Ghostbusters 2 made was the disputes between the main cast and crew since Ghostbusters. Ramis would later say there was a little air to be cleared out before they could start working together again. So, missing the original production start date, in March 1988, Ovitz, everyone's agent, arranged a private lunch for himself, Murray, Aykroyd, Ramis, and Reitman at Jimmy's Celebrity Restaurant in Beverly Hills. There were concerns of whether Murray could carry a film after being away from acting for 4 years, and worries about Aykroyd, who had been a part of several recent film failures.
Will you please suck out the poison for me?
But while together sitting around that table, they realized how much fun it was being together.
And it was just really, really fun to be together. We were really funny together.
Ramis pitched the script they were finishing and everyone was on board. But something happened from that lunch in March to when everyone showed up for production in November. Murray would later go on to say at a panel during the 2021 Santa Barbara International Film Festival that he was tricked into being a part of Ghostbusters 2. It ended up not being the story they wrote. They got us in the sequel under false pretenses. Harold had this great idea, but by the time we got to shooting it, I showed up on set.
What the hell's this? What is this thing? But we were already shooting it. We had to figure out how to make that one work.
The cat still hasn't come out of the bag on who tricked Murray into coming back. The reality was that the studio couldn't make a sequel unless there was unanimous approval by Reitman, Murray, Aykroyd, and Ramis. And as we explained earlier, Murray was difficult to pin down, and it wouldn't be the first time that one of his collaborators might say whatever needed to be said to get Murray to agree to being in a project. But don't feel too bad about Murray. Between the time he agreed to do the film and principal photography, he had been negotiating for a $10 million contract to make the film. Aykroyd and Ramis wouldn't accept a penny less than what Murray was making. Columbia refused to pay out the $10 million each and opted instead for a minimum salary in exchange for a 10% return at the box office. In the end, the studio would end up paying the actors more than $20 million for each of their performances in the sequel. Perhaps Murray should have allowed himself to be tricked more often.
Typical.
Filming began in November 1988. Reitman rushed from completing the comedy Twins to shooting Ghostbusters 2. Casting wouldn't be difficult considering most of the original players were back, to include Annie Potts as Janine.
Well, just don't go in there.
Rick Moranis as Louis Tully.
I was born to wear this stuff.
And Sigourney as Dana.
You never asked me.
Even future Ghostbusters director Jason Reitman has a small part insulting Ray Stantz at a kid's birthday party at the beginning of the film.
No, he just says you guys are full of crap and that's why you went out of business.
Since an agreement couldn't be made for William Atherton to return as Walter Peck, the new Ghostbusters hater of Hardmire was played by Kurt Fuller, who had previously auditioned for Reitman.
Two-bit frauds and publicity hounds like you and your friends.
Peter McNichol, who will make a name for himself on Ally McBeal, was cast as Dr. Poha, who becomes the conduit for the villain to enter the universe.
A child?
The villain Vigo, who was based on Vlad the Impaler, was visually played by Wilhelm von Homburg, but voiced by Max von Sydow.
Now is the season of evil.
Homburg, who had not been told his voice would be dubbed, angrily stormed out of the Ghostbusters 2 screening when he realized what had been done. New York authorities were more supportive the second time around after the huge success of Ghostbusters. According to Reitman, everyone wanted to be a part of the sequel.
And it actually put more pressure on me. I said, oh my God, I really got to make a good movie.
Filming moved back to Los Angeles in late December and wrapped on March 7th, 1989. Test screenings showed there were numerous problems with the film. Audiences also felt Vigo, the slime, and the associated ghosts didn't connect well. Extensive reshoots took place in March and April, only 2 months before the film's release, with Reitman filming a new 25-minute ending for the film. They made changes that included scenes that better showed how the slime could be charged by negative or positive emotions, making it more clear for audiences.
But you take the cake! You're just...
They also included more scenes that put the Ghostbusters at risk from Vigo.
Ray, can you move?
No.
The River of Slime was a vegetable-based gel with food coloring. Maintaining it required 100,000 gallons of slime made fresh in 4 on-site cement mixers daily because it deteriorated quickly. While we are never told who Oscar the Baby's dad is, Reitman suggested in the DVD commentary that the musician we first meet with Dana in Ghostbusters is actually the father. Also, during production, Ecto-1 finally broke down while shooting on the Brooklyn Bridge, forcing the team to use a second 1959 Miller Meteor they had purchased as Ecto-1A. Notable cameos in the movie included Brian Doyle Murray, brother of Bill Murray, who played the psychiatrist at the mental hospital. Cheech Marin was a post-production addition who plays the dock worker who says,
"Well, better late than never."
Also, Bobby Brown, who sings the song On Our Own in the movie, played the doorman at Gracie Mansion when the Ghostbusters meet the mayor. Run DMC also co-wrote and performed an updated version of Ray Parker's hit song Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters 2 original release date was supposed to be in July, until it learned they would be up against the incredibly hyped Michael Keaton Batman movie. The movie premiered on June 15, 1989 at Grauman's Chinese Theater. It earned $29.5 million in its opening weekend, beating Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade for the biggest box office weekend to date. It would be a short-lived record as Batman would sweep in with a $43 million weekend the very next week.
I'm Batman.
The movie would end up earning more than $215 million worldwide and was the 8th highest grossing film of 1989.
2 in the box!
Ready to go.
We be fast and they be slow.
While everyone showed up to see the sequel, the response from critics and fans indicated Ghostbusters 2 didn't live up to the expectations of the first movie. Roger Ebert called it a disappointment, saying he reviewed Ghostbusters 2 in a public screening and only heard one laugh the entire film.
One laugh in 2 hours.
Columbia was ultimately disappointed, and despite being relatively successful financially, it failed to meet their expectations as the highest grossing comedy of all time. With a lack of passionate responses from critics and fans, some believe that Ghostbusters 2 failed to attract teen audiences because of Batman and family audiences because of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Regardless of the reasons, most Ghostbuster fans would agree that the sequel is not as good as the original. Bill Murray told Entertainment Weekly that he was very disappointed with the way the film turned out. He said those special effects guys took over. It was too much of the slime and not enough of us. So the question is, would that keep them from making a third Ghostbusters movie? Apparently, Bill Murray can only be tricked into a role twice before he puts his foot down. Despite Ghostbusters 2 being an overall disappointment for Columbia, in January 1992 the studio, which had been sold by Coke to Sony shortly after the Ghostbusters 2 failure, touched bases with Ivan Reitman about making a third Ghostbusters movie. The problem was Murray had absolutely no interest in being involved, and it made Sony reluctant to move forward. A year and a half later, in the August 1993 issue of Playboy magazine, Aykroyd was interviewed on the set of Coneheads and asked about Ghostbusters. He said, "The one movie I don't think we'll further exploit is Ghostbusters. It looks like that about had its run. But if I could get that team together, it would be a real dream, because I think there's a great story to be told. But it won't be for a while." Then, in February 1994, Aykroyd appeared on WWOR Channel 9 News, and when asked about Ghostbusters, he said he had a story in mind, but it would depend on getting the others together again. Finally, 7 years after Ghostbusters 2, in September 1996, Aykroyd started getting excited about Ghostbusters again, thanks to a movie called Tommy Boy. Chris Farley had hit Dan Aykroyd in the funny bone with his performance in the movie, and he began envisioning a next generation of Ghostbusters that the old team could hand the reins over to.
Bad guy in little gold.
He got busy on a script he called Ghostbusters 3 Hellbent. In the first draft, the Ghostbusters are transported to an alternate version of Manhattan called Manhattan. There, people and places are the hellish versions of their originals. The Ghostbusters would come face to face with the devil. But with Murray not willing to do the movie, Ramis focused on directing, and Chris Farley being a comedic breath of fresh air, Aykroyd, with the help of Tom Davis, began adjusting the script so that the younger actors would be the stars and the original Ghostbusters would return in supporting roles. In the script, Murray's character initially died off on screen, but it was reframed that Peter had left to be with Dana, and the new Ghostbusters would come aboard to help Ray, Egon, and Winston with their struggling business. By September 1996, Aykroyd was beginning a second draft and having meetings with Sony. At the September 10th Vancouver Province Showcase, Aykroyd said Sony wants to make the movie and so do I.
I hope we're going to be in business in the spring. And
I would want to make it with Harold Ramis. We've been discussing it and we are going back into meetings now. He also said they'd be doing the movie without Bill Murray and Ivan Reitman as they want to concentrate on other things.
And you know, if he wants to take and live his life privately and not go back to work, I mean, you got to respect that.
He said he could see Chris Farley stepping into the cast and Will Smith would make a great Ghostbuster too. There was also interest in Chris Rock and Ben Stiller becoming Ghostbusters. A week later, Aykroyd announced that negotiations were underway and Ramis was possibly directing. In March 1997, Ernie Hudson said he would love to do another Ghostbusters movie, although there hadn't been any progress yet.
I mean, I hope somebody with some money calls me and, you know.
But suddenly the excitement around doing a third movie started to stall. By September, Ramis was no longer confident that the studio wanted to move forward.
We just want to write a good script first and then see if it's worth making a movie.
The big problem seemed to be that they weren't sure they wanted to make the movie if Bill Murray wasn't in it. Aykroyd began rewriting a version of the script that included Murray, but ultimately, Bill just didn't want to do the movie. Then in December, Chris Farley died of a drug overdose eerily similar to that of John Belushi, who happened to be the comedian's idol. There were many reasons why Ghostbusters 3 wasn't moving forward, and Farley's death would no doubt be one of them. Ghostbusters 3 would languish in rumor mill releases for the next 5 years, until finally in 2002, the studio told Aykroyd they had concerns over the film's high production cost and felt it was a risky proposition. It seemed as if the Ghostbusters ride was truly over.
There gotta be a few sparks of sweet humanity left in this burned out burg. We just have to figure out a way to mobilize it.
By the end of 2002, Ghostbusters 3 was dead. Over the next 5 years, the creative engine that built the franchise was split to the corners of the entertainment universe. Aykroyd was bouncing around doing bit parts in movies like 50 First Dates and I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry.
What you shove up your ass is your own business.
Captain,
shut up.
Reitman directed My Super Ex-Girlfriend, and Ramis directed Analyze This and Bedazzled. Bill Murray had done Lost in Translation and The Life Aquatic. These one-time close friends couldn't be further apart, on top of the fact that Ramis and Murray had a huge falling out while making 1993's Groundhog's Day. Then, something totally unexpected happened. In January 2007, a Slovenian gaming company called Zootfly started putting trailers on YouTube showing an early playable version of a game based on the Ghostbusters franchise. The only problem was Zootfly had not secured the license to make a Ghostbusters game. In fact, Terminal Reality had been working on an official Ghostbusters game, but had yet to been greenlit by Sony. The fan response by Zootfly's video clips had been overwhelming. Mark Randall, the co-founder of Terminal Reality, said in Xbox Magazine that Zootfly inadvertently helped them and Vivendi Games sell the concept. When the footage came out, they had been close to a green light meeting, and when Sony executives saw the fan reaction to the video clips, they immediately knew the Ghostbusters game was going to be a hit. They put it into production with the PlayStation 3 being the lead development platform. Now, they just needed some real Ghostbusters. The game's executive producer John Melchior knew Dan Aykroyd was the most important person to get on board. After reaching out to his agent, Melchior met with Aykroyd, who wanted to make sure they weren't just an opportunist video game company who didn't care about the property. He recognized they were fans and wanted to explore the universe. He loved the work that they had done, and he felt like the game was in the right hands and was willing to work with them. Next, they met with Ramis, who was directing an episode of The Office. He also gave his blessing when he felt like the game would try to capture the same humorous tone from the movies. After that, the game developers met with Potts, Hudson, Brian Doyle Murray, and Atherton.
It's hard to get rid of old Peck.
Who were all on board from day one. The one person they didn't have and they were worried about was Bill Murray.
Hi.
It was no secret at the time that Murray had little interest in doing Ghostbusters stuff. In fact, everyone including Aykroyd and Ramis told them, "You aren't going to get Murray. No way, no how." Knowing they needed the cornerstone of the franchise, they called Bill's 1-800 number and they left a message, but didn't hear back. Months went by and they called again, but nothing.
Janine, any calls?
No.
Any messages?
No.
Then they sent an offer over to his lawyer and they kept calling, but nothing.
Because you did not use the magic word.
They offered to pay for rounds of golf in Hawaii between recording sessions, but they got nothing back but silence. Then, out of the blue, when the game was almost in alpha development, the red dot on Melchior's phone was blinking. He clicked on it, and the distinctive voice of Bill Murray was speaking. Bill mentioned in the message that he was in South Carolina and there were many golf courses there to play. The team was ecstatic. They got him. They called him back and left a message excited that he agreed to do it. And then once again, they heard nothing back.
Yes, it's true.
Desperate, they contacted Murray's younger brother to see if he could do a sound-alike voice, but that didn't work. Their executives told them no bill meant no game, and they were missing alpha development. Then, out of the blue, Murray called back again at the last minute, and he agreed to record in New York. The game allowed Aykroyd and Ramis to explore some aspects of the original films that they had not been able to do, such as the history of the librarian ghost and the appearance of Ivo Shandor as Gozer. And the alternate dimensions that open up in the latter half of the game were based on the original Ghostbusters 3 Hellbent concept. But while the game is frequently considered an important part of the franchise history, besides being fun for the fans, what makes it so important is that the experience Bill Murray had changed his mind about participating in Ghostbusters in the future. During a screening of his film City of Ember in September 2008, Murray said doing the video game made Ghostbusters fun again, and he found himself walking down Fifth Avenue singing the song.
And you'll love it. It's fun, it's exciting.
The game released June 16, 2009, and it was a hit with fans and would sell more than 3 million units. The success of the game and Murray's change of mind would also help Sony change their mind. It changed their mind so much, they were ready to make another movie.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Oh, did you want to?
Sorry, I'll let you.
The video game was coming along so well, the studio hired the Office screenwriters Gene Stupnitsky and Lee Eisenberg to write a new screenplay for a Ghostbusters film, which would revolve around a new cast with uncertain involvement from the original cast. Aykroyd put out that filming for the script was expected to start in late 2009 or mid-2010, with a target release of 2011 or 2012. And even better, Ivan Reitman had committed to directing the film. Despite Murray's change of heart after the video game, he read the new script, but he still didn't want to do the film. Bill Murray famously said on the David Letterman show in 2010 that he'd only do the movie if they killed off his character in the first reel. Production on the film continued and they considered recasting Murray's character. Production stalled, and in July 2012, Idiocracy and Tropic Thunder screenwriter Etan Cohen was hired as the new scriptwriter.
What do you mean, you people?
The new script still centered around a new cast, but this time as students from Columbia University who become Ghostbusters because of discoveries from their research. The original Ghostbusters, besides Murray, would be reprising their roles in the supporting cast.
Look, I ain't afraid of no ghosts.
Despite all of the difficulty with Murray, they still left a spot open for him in case he wanted to do it last minute. The revised script was completed with plans to start production in 2015 when a disaster happened in the Ghostbusters universe. On February 24, 2014, Harold Ramis died. He passed away due to complications from autoimmune inflammatory vasculitis, which he'd been diagnosed with 4 years earlier. He was only 69. The loss of Ramis put the production into another tailspin. Initially, the studio felt that Ramis's role in the film had been minimal and would not affect production, but Reitman felt the screenplay had to be reworked to account for it. Following meetings with Sony, Reitman decided to drop out of the film both because of the impact of Ramis's death and the difficulty of getting the third Ghostbusters film made. He did agree to stay on and help with a new director. Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, who had done the Lego Movie, passed on the project, and Ruben Fleischer, who had done Zombieland, was also considered. In August 2014, Sony reached out to Paul Feig of Freaks and Geeks and Bridesmaids to direct. At first, he passed on the offer, saying there was no way because all you can do is fail making a sequel to this classic film. But after giving it some thought, Feig thought they might be able to completely reboot the film with 4 hilarious ladies. He already had a long working relationship with Melissa McCarthy. He pitched the idea to Sony, and they loved it. Reitman wasn't sure if he agreed with the idea, but he felt it was fresh. He also noted that most of the male actors they talked with about being new Ghostbusters were too frightened to step in the footsteps of the 4 originals. So in October, Feig announced the film and his involvement along with co-writer Kai Dippold and confirmed his intention to have hilarious women star in the film. Controversy ignited following Feig's Twitter post about the project. Some fans who had been waiting years for the Ghostbusters 3 were not happy to learn the property was being rebooted and the male Ghostbusters were now female Ghostbusters. The irony, of course, being that he chose to reboot the franchise because he respected the originals so much. Despite the initial controversy, Feig confirmed in January 2015 his intention to use McCarthy, Kristen Wiig, Kate McKinnon, and Leslie Jones in the lead roles. During the pre-production of what would ultimately be Ghostbusters Answer the Call, Reitman approached Sony with the idea of Ghost Corps, which would be a series of films based on the Ghostbusters franchise. Sony had been looking for a property comparable to the Marvel Cinematic Universe from which they could pull sequels, side stories, and other options for years to come. In March, Sony founded the new organization with Reitman and Aykroyd overseeing its productions, and Ghostbusters Answer the Call became the first film branded with the Ghost Corps name. Right after forming the production company, Deadline broke that an all-male-led Ghostbusters film was being developed by the Ghost Corps label with Channing Tatum and Chris Pratt starring. Marvel's Anthony and Joe Russo signed on as co-directors. The project would be canceled in 2016 with the Russo brothers no longer attached. Reitman would later say that he wasn't involved with the project, but it never got past early development stages anyways. Casting for Answer the Call included asking Emma Stone to star, but she declined as she didn't want to commit to another franchise so soon after doing Spider-Man. Another notable SNL comedian, Cecily Strong, who appears in a supporting role, was considered for a leading role alongside the other SNL ladies. Thor himself, Chris Hemsworth, who shares an agent with Feig, made it known he wanted to be in the movie. He was given the role of hunky man secretary Kevin, mirroring the role of Janine played by Annie Potts in the original two movies.
Seriously, there's no way that you're this sweet, this funny, this fine.
Bill Murray, who had refused to be a part of another Ghostbusters movie, agreed to do a cameo in the film because of his friendship with McCarthy and McKinnon. He felt it was important to support their project. Although in true Murray form, no one knew if he would actually show up to do his cameo until he arrived on the day it was filmed.
Let's start light and easy. Why are you pretending to catch ghosts?
Along with Murray, Aykroyd and Hudson would also have cameos, although not as Ghostbusters. Sigourney Weaver and Annie Potts also accepted cameos in the movie as different characters. And while Ramis couldn't make a cameo as a result of his passing, there is a bust of Ramis' head just outside of Aaron's university office near the beginning of the movie. Rick Moranis chose not to return as Louis Tully or as any alternate character. Moranis gradually disappeared from public life due to the difficulties of combining a career with being a full-time single father. He maintained that he never completely retired from acting, but just became very selective about roles. Despite being approached several times to appear in a potential third movie, he named his disappointment with Ghostbusters 2 and his lack of interest in things that don't appeal to him as reasons not to commit. For that reason, he had already declined a cameo in the 2016 remake, stating, "I wish them well, but it just makes no sense to me to do one day of shooting on something I did 30 years ago."
Oh, it's you. Okay, but I didn't know you had your license.
Filming began on June 17th in Boston and wrapped on September 19th in New York City. Reshoots would take place in Los Angeles as late as May 2016, and they included new scenes that focused on the huge internet controversy that some critics felt were shots fired back at fans. The reshoot response was from their trailer release on March 3rd, which quickly became the biggest downvoted trailer video of all time on YouTube. Ghostbusters 2016 would hit theaters on July 15th, grossing $229 million worldwide. With a production cost of $144 million and a huge marketing budget, the movie needed to clear at least $300 million to break even. Prior to the release, Feig said the movie needed to make at least $500 million on the low side. By August, media outlets like Forbes and the Wall Street Journal had begun calling Ghostbusters a box office bomb. The film contributed to Sony taking a $1 billion write-down in January 2017. Following the release of the film, Leslie Jones became the target of racist and sexist abuse on Twitter.
Don't move! You gotta,
No, I'm tired.
No, listen.
I'm just gonna go ahead and take off. How about that?
Feig would later express regret that the social issues surrounding the movie affected its public perception and commercial performance. He said, "It's a great regret in my life that the movie didn't do better because I really loved it. It's not a perfect movie. None of my movies are perfect. I like what we did with it though. It was supposed to be there to entertain people. Nearly a year following the movie's release, Aykroyd would blame the film's underperformance on Feig, who he accused refused to shoot additional scenes requested by Aykroyd and Sony until test screenings demonstrated that they were necessary, costing an additional $30 to $40 million in reshoots. Sony would later refute the number, saying reshoots only cost between $3 and $4 million. Aykroyd would walk his criticism back a few days later, writing, "Paul Feig made a good movie and had a superb cast and plenty of money to do it. We just wish he had been more inclusive to the originators. It cost everyone, as it is unlikely Kristen, Leslie, Melissa, and Kate will ever reprise their roles as Ghostbusters, which is sad." While the principal cast and Feig had signed on for 2 sequels, Aykroyd ended up being right. Feig confirmed that a direct sequel would not be made due to the film's mediocre box office performance. Sony had created Ghost Corps, but would the poor performance of the 2016 movie be enough for them to throw in the towel on the franchise? In November 2018, Aykroyd was at it again, hyping up a new Ghostbusters movie. In an interview with Dan Rather, Aykroyd explained that the script for the next movie was being written right now, and he said there was the possibility of a reunion with the 3 remaining Ghostbusters, himself, Murray, and Hudson. He said the story is so good, he thinks Billy will come, even if he plays a ghost. A serious foreshadowing statement, considering we really did end up with a ghostly Ghostbuster for 2021's Ghostbuster Afterlife. Roll back the clock about 2 years. Ghostbusters Answer the Call had made its run in theaters, and someone very close to the franchise was having a very unexpected thought. An image popped into the head of a 39-year-old man. It was the image of a 12-year-old girl with a proton pack. She was in a cornfield. She fired the stream of energy into the field, making popcorn, which she ate and smiled. Then another thought popped into his head. It was a teenage boy who finds Ecto-1 in a barn and starts drifting through the wheat field like a snowboarder on a run. He didn't know who they were, but he knew there was a story there. That 39-year-old man was Jason Reitman, Ivan's son. What made the thought interesting is that Jason had said he would never make a Ghostbusters movie. But the idea compelled him so much, he decided to tell his father about it and ask him what he thought. His father loved it and encouraged him to pitch it to Sony's Ghost Corps. He ended up writing the script with Gil Kennan inside the Ghost Corps offices. Right outside the window was an endless line of tour groups around Ecto-1. They would sit and listen to the tour guides talk about the heritage of the legendary vehicle, which was a constant reminder who they were making the film for. After years of saying he would never make this movie, Jason didn't want it getting out until he got a green light. So he asked the executives at Sony to come in person by themselves and read the script in a room and leave. Only 3 people at Sony even knew the script existed, and they loved it. In January 2019, it was confirmed that Ivan Reitman's son Jason would direct and Ivan would produce. And we would all soon learn that those 2 kids he imagined were Spanglers. It was important to Jason that not only his father be happy with the movie he wanted to make, but that Harold Ramis's family would be okay with it because of how intimately personal the story was. He was delighted to learn they loved it. The director of Juno and Thank You for Smoking said that he felt Ghostbusters was the dragon that was waiting for him, and the longer he didn't make it, the more he was simply ignoring what was at the gate. In an interview, Reitman said this about his idea for the movie. "I don't think it's an accident that I was a kid on the set of Ghostbusters and that this is a movie about young people picking up that equipment and seeing how it works. It's not an accident that I have a 12-year-old daughter and that the center of this story is a brilliant 12-year-old girl who is a scientist using the Ghostbusters as a way to stop being an outsider and find a way to be a hero." But who would end up being his brilliant 12-year-old girl and joy-riding teenage boy? Believe it or not, McKenna Grace had appeared in over 50 films and TV titles before becoming a Ghostbuster. The young actress would turn just 13 when filming on Ghostbusters Afterlife began. The acting bug hit her at 4, and after her coach recognized her talent, she told her mom she needed an agent. After playing a young Tanya Harding and a young Captain Marvel among other roles, she found herself auditioning for a Jason Reitman movie and had no idea it was actually Ghostbusters. It wasn't until she went in for the chemistry reads that she realized what movie it was. In an interview with the Astro Awards, she said she saw a proton pack and Ivan Reitman and lost her mind.
Oh my gosh, this is insane. Even if I don't get it, I still feel honored to have gotten a chance to show Ivan Reitman and Jason Reitman my audition tape.
She said this is insane. She had to do her best to win the role of Phoebe. She had grown up her entire life loving the Ghostbusters, and she was honored to have a chance to be in it. They took the blonde-haired teenager and turned her into a female Egon Mini-Me, and she transformed for the part. Jason Reitman surprised her over Zoom that she had gotten the role. He couldn't be more happy that he found the girl for the character he'd imagined years before.
I had the proton pack in the Ghostbusters suit. I was like, oh my god, what's happening?
Finn Wolfhard is the most recognizable of the young cast due to his role in Stranger Things. He even wore a Ghostbusters outfit on that show. He thought they might not give him the role of Trevor, fearing it would be seen as a gimmick after the Stranger Things episode. But it was just the opposite. Reitman thought he looked good in the outfit, and he got the job. It also helps that he looks eerily like a young Egon Spengler. Carrie Coon, known from Gone Girl and Avengers Infinity War, would round out the Spengler cast as Mom Callie. New faces Logan Kim and Celeste O'Connor would earn the roles of Podcast and Lucky. Paul Rudd would be cast in yet another high-profile role in franchise, playing teacher, seismologist, and mom love interest Mr. Gruberson. Jason was inspired to cast Rudd because of his father Ivan. He said Paul is exactly the type of comedian his father would have cast as a Ghostbuster back in 1984, and that made him want Rudd in this film with him.
Hey,
Murray, Aykroyd, and Hudson all agreed to come back for the filming, including original cast members Annie Potts and Sigourney Weaver, though Sigourney would be relegated to a hilarious end credit scene with Murray. J.K. Simmons would also make a short appearance as Ivo Shandor, leader of the Cult of Gozer and the architect of Dana's apartment building on Central Park West in New York. In preparation for their roles, Coon and Grace were asked to read Violet Ramis's autobiography, Ghostbusters' Daughter, Life with My Dad, Harold Ramis, and much of their characterizations would be inspired by the book. On February 18, 2019, Jason Reitman got himself in hot water during an episode of the Bill Burr Monday Morning Podcast when he said it was his goal to go back to the original technique and hand the movie back to fans. Reitman's comments quickly drew backlash from those who felt he was suggesting that the 2016 film was not good enough for fans. Jason quickly came out to clarify his statement on Twitter, now X, saying that he has nothing but admiration for the 2016 movie. Because the 2016 movie was a self-titled reboot, his movie was a continuation of the first two movies, and handing the movie back to the fans was because his movie was connected to those first two. Paul Feig, who had directed the 2016 film and had been afraid to make a continuation and mess it up, came to Jason's defense saying he supported me when I couldn't get movies made and has always been a supporter of Ghostbusters Answer the Call. While all seemed settled and the misunderstanding cleared up, apparently Leslie Jones never forgave the director. In her 2023 book, Leslie F***ing Jones, the 51-year-old comedian said she felt like his comment was unforgivable and the damage was done. Bringing up the idea of giving the movie back to the fans was a pretty clear shout out to all these losers who went after us for making an all-female movie, she said.
So I don't know if it was a race thing or a lady thing, but I'm mad as hell.
Filming for Ghostbusters Afterlife began on July 12, 2019 in and around Calgary, Alberta in Canada under the working title Rust City. It was no easy task to find the ideal location for the movie. After scouting locations in New Mexico and Oklahoma, the production decided the area outside and around Calgary was perfect, and they were able to build Egon's farmhouse as an on-set location. One of the most amazing aspects of Ghostbusters Afterlife was the incredible realistic-looking ghost of Harold Ramis's Egon Spengler. The look of the ghost mirrored the now-departed Ramis. To the surprise of many fans, that wasn't all CGI. Bob Gunton, who you would recognize as Warden Norton from Shawshank Redemption, among other roles, gave the physical performance of the ghost of Egon. That performance was then translated through a virtual character. The production team scanned the 1984 movie film at high resolution, capturing the look of Ramis from the original. When they felt like they had the look, they began an aging process that would make him the same age as the original Ghostbusters today. To also make it feel like Egon was present, the production crew included Egon's favorite snacks like Cheez-Its, Crunch, and the Twinkie. While there is no Slimer in this movie, there is a Muncher, who was spontaneously voiced by Josh Gad, who voices the snowman Olaf in the Frozen movies. After 68 days of filming, principal photography wrapped on October 18, 2019. The movie was scheduled for wide release on July 10, 2020, but was pushed back to March 5, 2021 because of the COVID pandemic. The movie release was shifted again to June when the studio became concerned that audiences were not yet coming back to theaters thanks to low numbers from Christopher Nolan's latest film, Tenet. While waiting for release, the film was given a surprise screening on August 23rd during the 2021 CinemaCon event in Las Vegas. Ivan was on hand to watch the movie and talk to fans about Ghostbusters. Jason said all he wanted to do was make his dad proud. After the screening, they walked backstage and it was dark. They were using flashlights to guide them. Ivan stopped everyone and pulled his son into a hug and with his eyes welling up said, "I'm just so proud to be your father." It's all Jason ever wanted to hear. The studio finally felt comfortable and Ghostbusters Afterlife premiered November 19, 2021 and was dedicated to Ramis and producer Tom Pollock, who died shortly before the movie was completed. The movie would earn $204 million worldwide against a production budget of $75 million, making it a box office success. Critics would ultimately give it a 64% certified fresh across 308 reviews, but it was obvious fans liked the movie with a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes with more than 5,000 verified ratings. The box office success and fan response to the film was enough to get Sony to make a sequel, but this time they were coming home to New York City. It was obvious from the post-credit scenes that Jason Reitman wanted to make more Ghostbusters movies, and he wanted to take the story back to the firehouse. Aykroyd had an even bigger vision. In December 2021, Aykroyd told USA Today that he'd love to see the original team perform in Ghostbusters 4, 5, and 6. They could all continue to be involved in the movies until they actually died in real life. Who knows how many movies the franchise has left, but one thing was certain. With the success of Afterlife, Sony would let them go for at least one more time. And yes, the OG Ghostbusters would be in that movie as well. As we said before, Jason and his writing partner Gil Kenan knew where they wanted to go post-Afterlife, and they got busy coming up with the idea for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire right away. With Jason coming back to direct again, they pitched the idea to Ivan as a full concept, and he loved it. He especially liked the character of Melody. Kenan recalled that he saw the joy in Ivan's eyes when he started to understand where they were taking that storyline from ghosts essentially being vermin to something deeper. Having Ivan's blessing on making such a huge change in the universe gave him and Jason confidence moving forward on the script. But unfortunately, Ivan wouldn't be around to see the fourth Ghostbusters movie in his universe get made. On February 12, 2022, Ivan Reitman passed away in his sleep at his home in Montecito, California at the age of 75. But Ivan's legacy would gain another chapter when Sony announced 2 months following his death that a sequel to Afterlife was in early development. In June 2022, Jason Reitman confirmed the film was being made with him as director under the working title Firehouse. Later in June, it was announced that the sequel would take place in New York. 4 months later, on October 5th, McKenna Grace announced that she would reprise her role as Phoebe, and Ernie Hudson revealed he had read the script for the film a short time later. And then something unexpected happened. In December, it was announced Kenan would take over as director from Reitman, who would remain as a writer and producer. There was never any official reason given, but some have speculated that with his father's passing, Jason no longer felt the need to direct again because of his experience with his father making Afterlife. The official statement from Jason Reitman was this: "A few years ago, my father handed me the keys to Ecto-1, and together we made Ghostbusters Afterlife. Words will never express how grateful I am to have made a film with my father by my side. It's now time to hand those keys over to my creative partner and fellow Ghostbuster, Gil Kenan, a brilliant director who will keep the Spengler spirit alive. I can only hope to provide him the same producer care and support my father showed me." If Reitman was going to turn it over to someone, Kenan was a good choice. They'd been in Ghostbusters bed together from the beginning. And Kenan wasn't a novice director. He had previously made Monster House, City of Ember, and A Boy Called Christmas. At the same time Jason was turning the directing keys over, it was also confirmed that Paul Rudd, Finn Wolfhard, and Carrie Coon would be returning to their roles in the next movie. In March 2023, Kumail Nanjiani, Patton Oswalt, James Acaster, and Emily Allen Lind were cast in the film. Lind, who plays Melody, didn't know she would be playing a ghost until just before filming started. Because she was playing a different kind of ghost, Kenan wanted to keep that under wraps. William Atherton was also brought on to reprise his role as Walter Peck from the first Ghostbusters movie. This would be the first Ghostbusters film that did not include Sigourney Weaver. Kenan just didn't see a story for her in this, but said that didn't mean she wouldn't be back in the future. John Rothman also returned to reprise his role from the original Ghostbusters movie as the New York City Library Administrator. Nanjiani, who admitted to being a huge fan of the real Ghostbusters animated series, posted on X that the cartoon was a point of reference for this movie and that the filmmakers wanted to make a long episode of the animated series. Filming for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire began began on March 20th, 2023 in London. In April, Hudson confirmed that Aykroyd, Murray, and Potts would reprise their roles from the previous movie in this film. The story was centered around the Spanglers' return to the New York City firehouse, where they continued the Ghostbusters work. The family, which now seemed to include Mr. Gruberson, must once again save the world from a new evil. Celeste O'Connor and Logan Kim, who played Lucky and Podcast in the previous movie, would also return to their roles as new Ghostbusters. The film would also include the return of Slimer. In an interview, McKenna Grace said it was more difficult for her working with the original Ghostbusters in this movie than it had in Afterlife. In the previous movie, the OG cast came late in filming, but they were on set nearly the whole time for this one, and while she had fun working with them, she also felt a little intimidated and worried about screwing up in front of the guys who started the whole thing. Filming wrapped on June 23rd. The movie was scheduled to be released on December 20th, 2023, but was delayed to March 2024 because of the 118-day Hollywood SAG-AFTRA strike. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire released on March 22nd, 2024. As of the making of this definitive history, it has earned $145 million worldwide and is the 6th biggest movie of the year. The sequel to Afterlife hasn't fared as well with critics or fans as the 2021 movie did. It has a 44% unfresh review among 268 critics and an 83% fresh after more than 1,000 verified audience ratings. One critic called it a very busy movie that lacks the emotional hook of its predecessor while spending too much time on the wrong characters in a way that yields a rather lifeless, chilly affair. Ultimately, Frozen Empire, which surpassed Afterlife's budget by $25 million, will have to out-earn its predecessor to be seen as a Sony winner. Kennan has already voiced his desire to at least close out McKenna Grace's Ghostbuster movies as a trilogy. While we don't know yet if a 5th in-canon Ghostbusters movie is on the horizon, what we do know is that Sony is still planning for an upcoming animated Ghostbusters series for Netflix, with Reitman and Kennan as executive producers for the show. As of April 2024, according to Kennan, the show is in full development, scripts are being written, and art is being created. He says it's a great time to be a Ghostbuster, although no release date has been given yet. As the Ghostbusters franchise surpasses the $1 billion global box office mark with Frozen Empire, there is no doubt that the film Coca-Cola Never Wanted Made has made a permanent imprint on the pop culture universe. From cartoons to video games, comics, books, action figures, Legos, and even slot machines, it would be hard to find someone who doesn't know who and what Ghostbusters are. And the legacy continues as Dark Horse Comics is preparing to publish a limited comic book series, Ghostbusters Back in Town, later in 2024. The series will cover the events that take place between Afterlife and Frozen Empire. And we have a feeling there will be more in the future for one of Sony's biggest properties. But what do you think? What does the Ghostbuster franchise mean to you? What's your earliest memory of Ghostbusters? Would you like Sony to continue making Ghostbusters movie, or are you happy with how things have ended with Frozen Empire? And what ideas do you have about where they can take the ghost-busting business in the future? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Also, don't forget to check out this incredible limited edition Ghostbusters-inspired graphic design from the amazing artists at Mixtees.com. Get 20% off your purchase by using coupon code THEPOPCAST. The link is in the description below.
Until then, this is Peter Venkman saying, see you then.